Which is better, the Greek majority text or the Greek critical text? Hi, I'm Ken Yates from Grace Evangelical Society, and I'd like to just spend a few minutes discussing that question. I hope I didn't run anybody off with that question. I'm going to talk about this in layman's terms. And it's an important question in some sense because you'll hear about it in theological discussions. Well, the majority text says this or the critical text says this. But it also is going to determine what translation you use. As a general rule, even though it's not exactly right, the King James Version and the New King James Version are pretty much based upon the majority text, whereas most other translations are based upon the critical text. So what's the difference between the two, or how do these texts come to be? Well, in very simple terms, the majority text is the Greek New Testament that reflects the majority of Greek manuscripts. The New Testament has thousands of manuscripts. Some of these manuscripts are just a portion of a verse. Some manuscripts include all of the New Testament. And the majority text is, if you're talking about a particular passage or a particular verse, what do the majority of the manuscripts say? The critical text, on the other hand, is based upon a few older manuscripts. So that view is that the oldest manuscripts are closest to the original, because we don't have any of the original letters for any of the New Testament books. And so the argument goes that the oldest manuscripts reflect or are closest to the original. Even though we don't have the original, the oldest manuscripts are closest to it, and so they reflect what the original manuscripts say. Now, I just have to tell you that the vast majority of New Testament scholars today go with the critical text. They say that these oldest manuscripts, even though they're fewer in number, reflect the original. So if you go to most seminaries, that's what you're going to be taught. Or even if you do something online, for example, the probability is that whoever's teaching the Greek class is going to say that the critical text is the one that goes back to the original manuscripts of Paul and Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. And that is, again, the overwhelming view of New Testament scholarship today. I just want to say that even though that is the overwhelming view, there are reasons for not accepting that. There are very good reasons for taking the majority text as the correct text. That's my personal view. Bob Wilkin, the head of Grace Evangelical Society, that's his view as well. And there's other very, very, very fine linguists, scholars who take the view as well. Is it important? Well, yes, sometimes it is. For example, the majority text has the account of the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. The critical text does not. So one of the questions you'll run into is, did John write the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8? If you believe the critical text reflects what he wrote, then you're going to answer no. And you might conclude, well, there's no need to study that particular passage, those 12 verses or so. The same thing with the ending of the book of Mark. Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 20. The majority text has those verses. The critical text does not. Now, sometimes it gets a little tricky there because in that particular case, someone might say, well, the critical text doesn't have it, but some will say that it was added later by someone other than Mark, but it's still inspired. It's kind of tricky, that kind of like the last chapter in Deuteronomy records the death of Moses. Well, Moses didn't write about his death. Someone else did, but it was still inspired. So you might hear someone who says, well, I'm a critical text guy, but I still believe Mark 16, 9 through 20 is inspired. But I think most critical text people would say, no, it wasn't written by Mark. It's not inspired, and so we really don't need to study it. Now, other times, critical text issues come into play. For example, in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, did Paul say, if I give my body to be burned? Or did he say, if I give my body in order that I might brag? Okay, the critical text says one thing, the majority text says another. So why is this important? Well, like I said, it's going to determine what translation you use. You're going to hear people discuss these issues. But here's some things to remember. Number one, no major doctrine, no cardinal doctrine is impacted by which text you use. And so don't worry that, wow, does the critical text say one thing, but if I look to the majority text, it teaches something completely heretical. No. And the two texts agree, I forgot the exact number, like 98% of the time. And the vast majority of differences are minor things like Jesus said to the 12 or Jesus said to the disciples. Those kind of differences. But sometimes the majority text, if you're studying a passage and you read something, the majority text, if it has a different reading, can add some clarity to it. And when you're studying the Bible, you may say something like, in your translation, the New American Standard, which is on the critical text, it says this. But just so that you're aware, the majority text has this writing, and it may shed some light on a particular passage. I also just want to put in a plug for the GES Seminary. If you want to know more about this, in our classes, this sometimes is discussed, particularly in the Greek classes that we offer. We'll discuss some of the issues between the critical text and the majority text. But then let me just say this about it. If you like the New American Standard, which is based upon the critical text, and you say, ooh, but maybe the majority text is the correct one, but I really like the New American Standard. Don't let this issue keep you from reading your Bible. If you really, now this is Ken Yates talking here. If you really like your New American Standard and you're reading it, and you're very familiar with it, maybe you got an old one or something, you got all your notes in it, just read it. But just be aware that sometimes the majority text, like I said, may add some clarity or may add another way to see something in a particular passage. Just be aware that it's there. Well, that was kind of like a quick and dirty on the majority text and the critical text. Scholars who know a lot more about it than I do might say, boy, that's too simple. Ken really didn't say this and he should have said this. But I hope it at least gives you an introduction. I hope it at least allows you to be aware of some of the issues. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, press the like button. And if you really like it, press the subscribe button. And until then, remember, keep grace in focus.